Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positive Male Role Model Podcast. I have an intuition you're really going to enjoy this episode, and I'm still your host, Austin. Thanks again for all your support. I told myself that this podcast took off enough, I'd invest in some better audio equipment. We're slowly getting closer to hitting that benchmark, so if you want to hear me get better audio quality, tell your friends about this podcast, get the word out, and you'll get what you want. These musical ensembles I weave into the episodes can get better too. So you invest in audio quality. Somebody better get Atlantic's A&R on the phone is all I'm trying to say. Anyway, today is gonna be a fun episode. Sometimes I make episodes where I'm like, oh yeah, a lot of other people talk about this topic, so I'm just gonna put my own spin on it. But sometimes I make episodes where I'm like, I'm pretty sure like very few people really talk about this on a deep level beyond a series of run-of-the-mill conventional buzzwords. And I relate to this topic on a deep, learned experience, personal level. So let me just tell my story and hope the audience is ready to go on a little voyage. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different from the usual ones. I'm going to take you on a journey, tell you a story. So full disclaimer right now, you started this episode and you're like half listening to me speak right now, or you really got to get to that one thing in like 5 minutes, do yourself a favor, pause this bad boy right now and play this episode when you actually have time. You will thank me. I can't take you somewhere if you're not really here or fully present in the first place. I know I'm rolling the dice with the attention span of my audience on this one, but I trust you guys. I trust you. Like, retry it. It's like that Mean Girls joke when the girls in the car all pull up to Lindsay Lohan at school and they're like, get in, loser. Today we're getting cinematic. I know, like, she said shopping, but for my purposes, we're getting cinematic. So step into the Pim Rim cinematic universe with me because today's topic is going to be a near and dear one. Intuition, trusting your gut. What is your gut feeling, your intuition? Why do a lot of us feel disconnected from that intuition and that voice? And how do you learn how to listen for it and to it? But yeah, this time we're not going to use a study. There are plenty of science studies on the existence of the gut feeling, our subconscious intuition, and things humans pick up on without being consciously aware of it. I'll link a couple in the podcast notes you can go through in your spare time, so you don't feel like I'm just sitting here saying, just trust me, bro, it's a thing. As a friend of the podcast told me once, what's personal is often universal. That stuff you think is only happening to you or only anecdotal, it's often a shared experience of many. So today, no study, no. We're getting mad creative. Today we're going to read a whole poem. Indulge me, we're going back to high school English class in this one, but maybe one you actually want to pay attention to this time. So today's reading is from Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, one of my all-time favorite poems. Foundational time in my life I found it type of thing. So Rilke writes from the perspective of a young man seeking guidance from an older male figure on his love life, future, from a place of precocious anxiety about a future life shrouded in the unknown. In the true spirit of embodying a positive male role model, he responds to that young man who sent him this letter from this perspective of an older person. He goes, "My dear Mr. Kappas, I have a letter from you unanswered for a long time. Not because I had forgotten it. On the contrary, it is the kind that one reads again when one finds it among other letters. And I recognize you in it as if you were very near. It is your letter of May 2nd, and I am sure you remember it. As I read it now, in the great silence of these distances, I am touched by your beautiful anxiety about life, even more than when I was in Paris, where everything echoes and fades away differently because of the excessive noise that makes things tremble. Here, where I am surrounded by an enormous landscape, which the winds move across as they come from the seas, here I feel that there is no one anywhere who can answer for you those questions and feelings which, in their depths, have a life of their own. For even the most articulate people are unable to help, since what words point to is so very delicate, it is almost unsayable. But even so, I think that you will not have to remain without a solution if you trust in things that are like the ones my eyes are now resting upon. If you trust in nature, in what is simple in nature, in the small things that hardly anyone sees and that can so suddenly become huge, immeasurable. If you have this love for what is humble and try very simply as someone who serves to win the confidence of what seems poor, then everything will become easier for you, more coherent and somehow more reconciling. Not in your conscious mind, perhaps, which stays behind, astonished, but in your innermost awareness, awakeness, and knowledge. You are so young, so much before all beginning, and I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers, which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. Perhaps you do carry within you the possibility of creating and forming as an especially blessed and pure way of living. Train yourself for that, but take whatever comes with great trust, and as long as it comes out of your will, out of some need of your innermost self, and take it upon yourself and don't hate anything. So yeah, that's the poem. They actually used to read this poem to us every year in high school at our first school assembly of the year. Really embedded this idea in me at a young age. I'm going to post the full poem in the podcast notes so that way you guys can read it yourselves. Innermost awareness. Gut feeling. So what does this make me think of, you might ask? Well, something from long ago. From the era of old male self-help books from the late aughts and early 2010s and demotivational meme text. Silk screen shirts of Goku from Dragon Ball and non-ironic croc wearing. There was this quote and commonly cited fake folklore legend that used to fly around on the internet across many circles. The legend is usually framed as a grandfather or elder passing wisdom to a young listener. The elder describes a battle between two wolves within oneself, using the battle as a metaphor for inner conflict. When the listener asks which wolf wins, the grandfather answers, whichever one you feed. Interesting legend. I'd like to extend that metaphor for illustrative purposes for this discussion. Let's say there's a wolf in you, the one that represents your inner voice, your gut feeling, your innermost desires. Then there's another wolf in you, one that represents societal expectation, what you think you're supposed to do to receive external validation, the good boy or good girl series of choices. Which wolf wins? The one you feed. The more you feed the inner voice wolf, the stronger the connection between you and your innermost needs, desires, and awareness becomes. The more you feed the societal expectation wolf, the weaker the connection between you and your innermost needs, desires, and awareness can temporarily become. It's a skill to learn how to listen to yourself. A whole RuneScape skill tree you gotta grind and gain experience in through taking that leap of faith to listen to it. The good thing is, in my completely isolated metaphor, I don't think either wolf can ever truly die, until you die at least. But they can get very malnourished, and to be present with your connection to that innermost awareness, that gut feeling, your innermost wolf, you have to make space for what it needs sometimes, even if it means a little disruption of your currently existing life. Now, am I saying quit your job, rent an RV, buy some flip-flops, and travel the world on some hippie type of timing? Well, I mean, maybe if that's what your innermost desire has always hungered to do at least once, and who am I going to be to stop you? But I think everybody has a different idea of what their inner self needs the most because I think we have different selves, right? For me, though, my soul, my inner self, my innermost wolf needed to go live in another country for a few months, get out of the system and routines and life I was living up to that point, to be able to see it all, my entire life, from a bird's eye view, instead of the view of an ant on the ground just trying to get to the next place. The opportunity to do this arose shortly following a breakup for me, where I already felt a little bit lost. So I trusted myself and I took that opportunity, even though I had never lived outside of my region of the country, much less in another country entirely. I had spent an entire life to that point, a slave to other people's expectations, to receive the validation and love that I thought I needed. I needed to go somewhere where no one knew me, someplace to be nobody, somewhere where I could see who I am without anything and anyone else really influencing it. Spend some time with only the innermost voice. I had to become a bit of a lone wolf, so to speak. It was extremely isolating. I spoke the language of the country, French, but only as much as school classes can teach you, not the nuances of specific idioms and sayings or even tonal delivery. It was practically a foreign language to try to communicate with others, disconnected from ways to feel completely connected to the specific locale you find yourself in. There's a similar quote I love. Everybody thinks they know who they are until you pick them up, put them in a foreign land, change the street signs they know so well to a different language, remove any sign of home. So who are you then? A lot of dark nights walking down tight streets for me. Distant, isolated streetlights being the only light, faintly fading halfway down alleyways between cramped and squished buildings. Not many cars, tighter roadways, more pedestrians, mountains, nature. space to sit with my feelings and thoughts, some questions I had held for a lifetime, but had always feared trying to answer or meaningfully address. Questions I had long since hidden from myself behind locked doors, some buried in the attic. Now, time for spring cleaning. We are living and loving the questions. Deep inner needs I had disconnected myself from. Ways I was living life for survival back in the States, but not necessarily in my best interest or what would make me the most happy. Running away from myself for so many years left my inner wolf malnourished. That trip, those few months, were me finally facing and becoming accountable for the state I left the wolf in all those years ago. When I found that wolf, it was so quiet and so small, you could barely hear it bark. But when you removed all the distractions, all the other noises, you could hear it bark, you could hear it whine, you could hear it breathe. It was all you could hear, like looking up at stars in the woods, the night sky free from much noise pollution at all. As I listened to that innermost awareness, that repressed sense of self, that gut feeling, it told me many things. It told me things I didn't want to hear. It told me things I didn't think I could face. It told me things I had always been afraid to try to bear. But it told me what I needed to hear. It told me about people I loved. It told me that I wanted to treat them better. It told me that hedonism wasn't the answer. It may have felt good in the short term. The way in which life zoomed in can be a series of short term moments. But in the long term, it only disconnected me further from myself. I remember walking home the night I first realized COVID was likely going to bring me home earlier than expected. I took a detour on my walk through the cramped streets, towards the more open area towards the nearby lake. Felt called to sit down and reflect, knowing the next morning all hell was likely to break loose. I remember sitting on a bench at 2 a.m., looking out over a lake, the moon reflecting off of it, waves crashing into the shore, the whisper of the winds through the trees. As I sat on that bench with my music playing, I didn't hear words. I felt feelings. Feelings that slowly over time, I understood more and more. I was afraid of my innermost self because I was once trapped with it before. Once upon a time when I was much younger, I had nothing and no one else but my innermost self to sit with. And that time of my life was very, very scary for me. So scary that I feared ever returning to that state, being trapped, alone, with nothing but my innermost self, awareness, and feelings. Too young to understand what they meant, but too green, fresh and new to the world to be able to resist the riptide of them as they swept over me. I learned to run because it felt like my only option, from others, from myself, from the world. I now reflect from this older age on that way of seeing things, and I can tell you from personal experience two things. To fear a certain state and the run from it tends to yield one of two possibilities, both equally poor. First, you run so much from it that you end up in an even worse position, born from the not great things that you were willing to accept into your life in exchange for avoiding that state you fear so much. Or often, instead, second option. You end up in that state you fear regardless, even though you were running from it, often specifically because you tried to run from it, and total implosion occurs. The only liberating answer, in my experience, is to not run. It is to walk into it. It is to let yourself be one with what you fear, to let that fear in, to walk through that fear, to accept that it will be here instead of trying to get rid of it, to witness how strong you are now with your own eyes, to see at this age and stage of your growth what you once could not tolerate and live with cannot hold you back anymore when you fully show up to face it now. The ways in which trauma can lead to us misperceiving and underrating our true strength. Rather than causing flooding, overwhelming the vessel like it once did, now the vessel can expand and hold what once overwhelmed you. I'm back on the bench now, listening to the crash of the waves, in between song lyrics like drum kicks and claps. The world is so small, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall, till it breaks, till it breaks, till it breaks. The cool breeze, the type of cool and wet breeze one can only feel near a sufficiently large body of water, the type of cold that sticks to your bones, even when you're wearing a windbreaker and it's not actually that cold outside. She said, what if I dive deep? Will you come in after me? Would you share your flaws with me? Let it go. I told her thinking is all wrong. Love will happen when he wants. No, it hurts sometimes, but don't let it go. Text on my phone, interrupting and quieting the music, letting the sound of the waves in more and more. A couple swans in the distance, bobbing on the water. Another song I was listening to on that bench, lyrics to it. I've been trying to be every man you saw in me, but in my eyes, they just flicker out and blur like ghosts. Before I go, I'll know. Can you show me a miracle? I wish I'd stayed the night, but I've got to go to America. This could take a while. Isn't it time that I come alive? And so I'll come, and so I'll go. Music has always spoken to me. I've lost myself a lot of times over the course of my life. I always find myself again through music, whether it's a music festival or an iPod Nano with skull candy headphones where you gotta hold it the right way in your hand or the right speaker goes out. So I guess it's not too surprising that my innermost awareness resonates most with music. That speaks to the feelings and knowledge my conscious mind either cannot see or doesn't want to see. Instead, it watches on as my innermost awareness processes and resonates to the music. Confused, astonished. As I got up from that bench after a few hours and completed my walk home, I had this overwhelming feeling of peace and serenity in me at the present moment, but a feeling for the future, very foreboding. The feeling something very, very hard was coming, that my life was going to change and it was going to be very hard for a while. That I was glad I had refueled my emotional battery on this trip for myself, because it was going to be a long time, an amount of time of indeterminate length, till I would get the chance to recharge it again. This battery percentage was going to have to stretch to last me a little while before I got back to a spiritual iPhone charger. That day was March 5th, 2020. I was back in America March 8th, and lockdowns began March 15th. I was very fortunate I had refined my sense of self and my relationship with my innermost awareness over that time on that trip to have fed and nourished that wolf, because I needed every bit of what I learned and how I grew for the next 1.5 years. Reminds me of one of my favorite song lyrics. One day you choke and urges overflow, and obsession weighs you down. But don't you waste the suffering you faced. It will serve you in due time. Ever since then, I've tried to follow that innermost awareness as much as I can. Like one of those golden arrows above your head in an RPG video game that tells you where to go. You gotta follow that quest marker. And it led me high and low through a lot of tough, dark moments. But it also led me to hope, the light at the end of the tunnel. So many blessings I never would have seen, realized, or experienced if I had let how afraid I was dictate where I did and did not go. When you grow up learning to fear things that are actually good for you under different circumstances, situations, with different people, sometimes fear isn't telling you where you should go. Sometimes fear isn't telling you what would make you the most happy. Sometimes it's telling you to stay where things feel familiar, even if what is familiar isn't actually in your best interest. One might call that a form of self-sabotage in certain situations. It's hard to tell the difference when you're in the moment, though. They're scary, triggering, those moments. Which voice that you hear, which feeling that you feel in moments of high stress corresponds to which wolf. Which wolf is your gut, and which wolf is maybe your self-limiting fear. Only strengthening the relay between your innermost voice and your conscious self and mind makes it easier to tell which one is which in my experience. Or maybe even when they're saying overlapping things, but in different ways. When your fear and anxiety flare up, as a good friend of mine likes to say, who are you going to be in the heat of the moment? One of my favorite movie quotes. What do you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight. A really quick aside to the audience. I acknowledge unironically quoting Fight Club isn't helping my whole I'm not a toxic influencer thing, but bear with me here. I don't mean an actual physical fight. I mean the internal spiritual fight between your inner wolves and which one you feed. Oh dear, it's getting worse, isn't it? What I just said sounds even more like I'm selling you an alpha male boot camp experience. I'm not, I promise. I don't have the time, the desire, or clearly high enough T, to run away from myself in the hyper-masculine imagery and worldviews for the sake of my own emotional self-protection, and to subscribe to an identity that's not my own, but who I wish I was because I don't like my real self. You know how strong I am, dude? I'm so strong, I can never let myself be seen as weak. Lol, come on. I think most emotionally developed adults come to realize you can only see how strong you truly are when you let yourself be vulnerable, even if it makes you look weak. If you're not rewarded for that and you get hurt for showing that, you're not doing the wrong thing. You're just doing the right thing around and with the wrong people to do it with. Rejection is redirection, as they say. Anyway, so that's all I got for today's episode. The epilogue of that journey of self is that the things I built during that time of solitude ended up being very useful 4 years later in this interstitial space of me thinking about what I wanted my next move to be. If I never had that journey, I'd probably never make this podcast. I probably don't have the confidence in myself to be able to bear so many private experiences that would have gone on forever unwitnessed for the world to hear and see, just in case it connects with them, as these moments have connected with me. For those musical fans out there, the truth is, I wish I could say I sat on that bench a boy and left that bench a man, more cynical and hard and all that. But the truth is, I never got off that bench. I still haven't. When I don't know what to do, I just try to find places that remind me of that time to find clarity. A balcony over a river, a bench on a beach, places where I am surrounded by an enormous landscape from which the winds move across as they come from the waters. Places where I can feel and trust in nature, in what is simple in nature, in the small things that hardly anyone sees, that we all take for granted and lose connection and presence with, and yet can so suddenly become huge, immeasurable. These places bring what it is in my innermost awareness to my conscious mind, gives my innermost wolf a T-bone steak and pulls a microphone up to his snout. It's a supporting vote of confidence to move closer to that voice, not a hurried retreat away, for sitting with whatever that voice has to say, no matter how much it scares you. Speaking of which, I have a feeling you guys will also dig the next episode. Every once in a while, like I mentioned earlier, I talk about a topic like intuition that I strongly identify with in my personal life. The next topic is going to be something that everybody in my personal life cites as a very important and identifying characteristic about me. The guy you go to for this thing because he has it in spades. Very excited to share that one with y'all when the time comes. Signing off for now, though. Can't wait to see you guys soon. If you like this channel, this episode, please feel free to subscribe for more on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or the YouTube channel. Rate the podcast 5 stars, ding the bell for more notifications. A lot of cool things coming down the pipeline in future episodes. Peace.